Welcome, everyone. Today, we will be talking about monitoring for quality and elevating site visit skills. And we're going to talk about some practical strategies and tools that can help all of you sharpen your observation skills, talk about interpreting data effectively, and making informed decisions that support positive outcomes in your out of school time programs that you lead or support. But before we go too far, I'm going to start with a short disclaimer.
This resource was developed in 2024 by the Nita M. Lowy 21st Century Community Learning Center's 21st CCLC National Technical Assistance Center, NTAC, funded under a grant from the U.S. Department of Education Department and administered by Synergy Enterprises Incorporated under Cooperative Agreement Number 287E230009 with the Department's Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. Opinions expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the position or policy of the Department, nor does mention of trade names, commercial products, or organizations imply endorsement by the Department or the federal government. This resource is in the public domain and is available at 21stcclcntech.org. Authorization to reproduce it in whole or in part is granted.
Well, now you're disclaimed. I will introduce myself. My name is Hillary Jones. I am one of the senior TA liaisons and a part of the 21st CCLC NTAC Technical Assistance Team. I have the privilege of working alongside a group of leaders who are really working to make a difference in the 21st CCLC programs. There are, along with myself, 3 other senior TA liaisons who are all assigned states across the country to provide support and technical assistance for you and help you identify what resources can be provided to the subgrantees that you work with and that you serve. Brittany, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, certainly. Thank you. So my name is Brittany, and I am a TA liaison with NTAC. My role here is to help facilitate some of those supports that we would be using to address issues that you identify within your subgrantees and things that you want to improve, as well as leading things like today's webinar with my wonderful colleague, Hillary.
Thanks, Brittany. And so welcome to each of you. And we'd love to have you introduce yourselves as well. So feel free in the chat, let us know who you are. And we're going to encourage you to share how long you've been working in your role. Because one of the things that we know is that all of you make up a Think Trust and you bring your own expertise and experiences to these conversations. And so we hope to have lots of conversation in our day today. We hope to share ideas, share resources amongst one another. And so we'd encourage you to take a second, introduce yourself. As you do that, though, I want to give this quick reminder that our role as the 21st CCLC NTAC is to support all of the professionals who work and support with 21st CCLC programs. And so we do that through evidence-based practices and resources, professional learning opportunities. And our goal is really to build the capacity of the work that all of our 21st CCLC programs are doing. We work to address the impacts of COVID-19, to provide equity of access of resources, to support students' SEL needs, fiscal compliance, statutory and programmatic requirements, and academic focus areas such as this list that's on the screen. And so we want to support and continue to support in all of the ways that we can in those areas. That said, as we jump into our session today, our purpose is to really take time to understand the purpose of and different mechanisms for site visits. And we'll spend a little bit of time here, especially for those who might be relatively new in your role or be thinking about how you might structure site visits for more effective and outcomes and for more impact. And then we'll dive pretty deep into elevating observational techniques and giving effective feedback. So as we do that today, we are going to get started and talk about the purpose that you might have in your site visits. So as you conduct site visits and various types of site visits to ensure effective oversight and support for subgrantees, your site visits might fall into a couple of categories. Number one is highlight visits. So highlight visits provide programs the opportunity to show off their strengths and aspects of their program that they are implementing effectively. Oftentimes, we see that programs during times of the year, like when we have lights on after school events, invite state leaders to come and to visit their programs. And here they want to show off their best of the best. And there are important things to be learned from these highlight visits, right? There's an opportunity to learn skills and strategies that maybe best practices that others from the states, others from your state can learn from. They may be opportunities to get information that then you want to take back to other subgrantees, to your conferences, right? They're a great opportunity to see some of the best of the time. But we recognize we also have to do compliance visits, right? We have to ensure that programs adhere to state regulations, to federal regulations, including those related to funding programs, to civil rights. These visits often involve reviewing documentation or interviewing staff to verify that all requirements are met. And these are probably the most common types of visits that SEAs, that the state education agencies are providing. And then the last is quality improvement visits. These are visits that are aimed at fostering continuous improvement in teaching and learning practices. And during these visits, one might provide guidance or resources to help programs implement evidence-based strategies, to effectively gather or analyze the data that they have, to develop an action plan, things that will enhance outcomes for students. These types of visits oftentimes are ones that are subcontracted to a partner to ensure that programs feel confident in sharing openly, but we recognize that in some states with less resources or less opportunities, they may not be able to do that. And so these are places for coaching and observation. They're places where you do a walk and see, is what I heard them called in one district, where the program director and school admin would walk and visit a program and talk about the things that they were seeing along with the state agency. In a community-based organization, this could include bringing along organizational leadership to have conversations about the practices that you're seeing. And really, together, all three of these visits create a comprehensive framework for supporting programs and providing high quality and equitable education opportunities. So I want you to think about the work you do and the visits that you personally get to do. And I want you to grab your annotation tool. So if you click by the green bar that says you are viewing Brittany Stanton's screen and view options, you should be able to drop down that view options bar and choose annotate. And I would love to have you give us a little stamp or sticker that tells us what kind of visits you get to do. Do you do primarily compliance visits? Do you get to do quality improvement visits? Do you get to do highlight visits? So Brittany, we are getting a few of each of these, right? And we're getting some highlight visits, some compliance visits. As I suspect, those quality improvement visits are very low, right, on that list. And a lot of times those ones that we push out to other people. And we'll talk a little bit more about all of these, but I'd love to hear from those of you who are joining this conversation. How do the different type of visits help improve outcomes in your state? So think about that. How does each type of visit or the visits that you do help improve outcomes in your state? For me, one of the things that I'll talk about is quality improvement visits, and really taking that intentional time can be one of the most powerful things that we can do to really elevate what's going on in our visit. I will also comment that quality improvement visits, they're the most time consuming type of visit. They take a lot of effort. They take pre-work, they take post-work, right? But they're worth the investment. For Lauren, they help identify potential topics for training or TA. and identify those best practices to share. Absolutely. Those highlight visits are a great way to identify those best practices to share. And those compliance ones can be great strategies for identifying those training, those TA needs. And I think as we think about them, all of these are meaningful. And my guess is that many of you on this call wish you could do more of them, right? Thumbs up if you wish you could do more of all of these visits. If you could wish you could spend more time in programming. I know that I do. But there's barriers to them, right? There's barriers to just making the time. If you're somebody who lives in one of these large states where it takes more like days than hours to travel across the state to go visit programs, I live in an itty bitty state that you can drive the length of in like 3 hours. So, right. But those are real challenges that we face. And so being creative around how to do those visits also requires intention, right? Being creative around how to make sure that the subgrantees are getting that feedback is an important part of the process. And so I encourage you just to be thinking about the visits that you do and to be intentional about offering and doing visits, because all of these are important for staying grounded in the work that our programs are doing, right? And so I'd encourage you, if you don't do any visits at all, if you have other people who do that work, to make sure that you're still making time regularly to spend time in programs. That doesn't mean every day, that doesn't mean every week, that may not even mean every month, but create the space for it. That said, as we think about visits and we think about monitoring for quality, there's a variety of information gathering methods that we can use to obtain a comprehensive understanding of subgrantee performance and their needs. And so some things to think about as you think about what you can do regarding monitoring and quality improvement are pre-visit self-reporting. So this allows programs to provide initial data, insights on their practices, their challenges, their achievements. And this gives you, especially if you're going for a visit, a foundation for evaluations, right? And it can be simple information such as contact information for a site, the schedule, the activity plans, right? That information that we typically gather. But it could create opportunities to go deeper about what programs are think about themselves and where they are focusing their time and attention. Consider including youth and staff interviews. These are critical for gaining that first-hand perspective on the program environment, on the practices, on community engagement, and offer you that qualitative data that complements or should complement quantitative measures. Brittany's going to talk about that more in a little bit. But if you're looking for some sample questions, you can find them in our archives, but make sure you create time to ask a few questions of staff. And you don't have to spend hours doing an interview or multiple interviews, but create that space. Of course, we know that we are going to spend some time with the leadership, right? Where we're going to talk about that senior role, what work they're doing. And so don't forget to include time for that. But then think about document reviews. This can involve things like examining policies, whether that's for compliance, whether that's for areas where they're showing growth or expertise where you would want to highlight, considering reviewing curriculum materials or student records, compliance documentation, all the things that are needed to verify adherence to regulations, as well as best practices. And then, of course, activity observations. They enable us to witness the implementation of teaching strategies, of staff-student interactions, and overall program operations real time. And it provides us this holistic view of the program's daily function. And honestly, for myself, this is often where I learn the most about a program and about the implementation and quality of the program. It's where you see the disconnect between the STEM programming and a craft, right? Where we say we're doing STEM instruction, but our students really are engaging in craft projects and not really getting the depth of programming that I'm hoping to see when I visit in order to improve the quality of what the outcomes. And then focus group discussions are the last strategy on this list, and they provide that in-depth information about participants' thoughts, about their feelings, about their experiences. These discussions can reveal insights that might not emerge through other methods, such as a survey or individual interviews, and really generate this deeper interaction around what's happening in the program. These, again, can be a significant time investment, but they can be very valuable, particularly when considering making significant changes to structure within what your state, what you're going to do, how you're approaching programming. It's a great chance to lean into that. And so when you think about these methods and really think about combining these methods, right, using more than one strategy to gather information, you can develop this nuanced and accurate picture of how your program is performing and identify areas for support and improvement. So, oftentimes we align certain types of information gathering with the various types of visits I just talked about. And so, we're going to launch a poll for you in a moment, but I want you to think about what types of data do you collect for highlight visits? What types of data do you collect for compliance visits? And what types of data do you collect for quality improvement visits? And so I'm going to ask you to take a second, answer these 3 questions for us. And if you're not doing one of those types of visits, I want you to think about what types of data would you like to collect for that type of visit that you're not doing, right? If you had time to do more highlight visits, what types of data would you collect? So grab a second, take a second, answer a couple questions for us real quick, because we're going to talk about it and about what you're doing as far as data collection goes and how you can use that or are using that in your program space. Uh-oh, you can't choose multiple choices for 2 of the questions. Okay, well, we will then look at the poll for the first question where you could answer it and then the way we intended. And then what we're going to do is just if you have other things that you want to add for question 2, question 3, just drop them in the chat. We'll take those into account. But as you think about that, what we're starting to see, so as you're filling this out still, I'm starting to see that 86% of you, so almost all of you are using activity observations for those highlight visits. And that's also a time where there's a lot of youth and staff interviews happening during those highlight visits, right? That's where you get to hear from them about what they love about your programs, the things they're excited about. You might talk to your leadership, that's at 43%, but we're using during that time a lot less around document reviews, focus groups, or other things. So for the compliance visits, though, although we could only choose one answer, document reviews are the top answer, 71%. And so you can see that's the top thing. My guess is some of you are probably also using some other strategies, and somebody even selected that they're using other strategies. So we'd love to hear from you if you're brave and you're using another strategy during your compliance visit. We'd love to hear what it is. And then the last one is these quality improvement visits. So again, activity observations had a high rating, pretty much a tie score between those leadership interviews, the document reviews, focus groups, and some others. So, you know, Brittany, one of the things that I hear as we think about that is that really no matter what kind of visit you're doing, there's a need for, and there is a well-rounded collection of data that we're using. And I think that that's an important thing for us to be thinking about, right? It's important to have enough data and enough information to inform, right, that professional development we're going to do, or that training and technical assistance to inform highlighting or lifting up a program or a strategy. So I want to ask all of you, what are some barriers that you face as you begin thinking about these visits? What are the challenges that you have as you gather the information? So feel free to unmute if you'd like to. Feel free to drop it in the chat. while you're thinking about yours, I'll share my number one barrier or challenge around it. And my very number one strategy is when I walk in the door for a visit, I get the best version of everything, right? They've been coached, they know what to say. I can ask everybody the same question and get the exact same answer out of their mouths. And I'm like, oh, they practiced this one,
Yeah.
right? And so that's sometimes a challenge to see the real things of programming. Brittany, did you have an idea?
Yeah, I mean, the document review, sometimes the documentation can be very daunting for a program to keep up on. And so whenever it comes time to say, all right, let's take a look at all this, there might be that barrier of it either doesn't exist or it hasn't been updated, or, you know, it was 6 months ago since they last did anything with it. And we know that for compliance purposes, that documentation is absolutely key. And also with these observations and these drop-ins that you have to do, again, for reporting purposes, timeliness is of the essence. And if we're not up on our documentation and then we're spending time trying to gather it in a rush so that we can meet deadlines, is that a true reflection of what actually is happening and being, you know, the evidence that's being collected? So document review is definitely an area I've seen folks struggle in.
Absolutely. Or it's clear that the document was created for the review and isn't part of their practice, right? Robin, you've got one. Go for it.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking with what Brittany's saying is, you know, I understand the importance of the monitoring visits and the all the policies and protocols and needing everything, but getting the staff and the site coordinators to take the time to actually get all the documentation that's needed, to take the time to do all of the information, to get it all gathered. I think that's the biggest struggle, is just them to understand the importance and have the time and put that as a priority.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I hear a lot, I won't say most frequently, but is the pushback around, we just want to help kids learn and grow, and we don't want to do data, or we don't
Exactly.
want reporting, right?
Yeah.
And you know, we lead into places where high quality data can result in high quality programs when used effectively, but it does require a really effective use of that sometimes is a challenge. So,
and I'm also thinking about how that ties back to funding, right? You have to be able to, like, the data has to back up the work for programs to continue and be funded.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I would encourage anyone, here's my little sales pitch that I wasn't actually planning on, but you've got it now. um, if you're coming to Summer Symposium, we are doing a session on reflective practices, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to use data and information to inform our practices and improve the quality of our programming and help people make the connections between those two, because we don't always. And so if you've got program directors who you know are coming to the conference, maybe you ping them and say, hey, you should go to that NTAC session. But anyway, I'm done with my commercial. I apologize. So as you think about information gathering, the biggest tool that you'll use is whatever observation tool that you decide to use. And if you're going to develop a tool or have a tool that's designed to support and highlight quality improvement, it's important that our observation tools effectively capture and evaluate the key elements of programs. And these tools are going to differ from state to state because of the expectations and rules around them. And they're also going to differ from a compliance tool. So compliance tools are often checklists with a yes, no, or a true, false indicator. But observation tools, they support highlights, and more importantly, they support quality improvement of programs. So these tools should clearly outline a specific skill or feature that's being assessed. ensuring that observers know exactly what to look for, what they should see, what they should hear, and each skill or feature should be accompanied by a well-defined criteria or indicators that can be easily observed or measured, and should include concrete examples, like what success actually looks like. They should include some kind of ranking system that allows observers to rate the extent to which each criteria is met, ranging from something like not observed to fully implemented, although that language specifically you don't have to use. It's just that idea and that essence of it's not here at all, or I don't see it at all, to it's done, and it's done with integrity, it's done with depth, it's done with strength. And this is a structure that not only facilitates consistent objective observations, but also helps identify areas where additional support or training may be needed. And that ultimately should drive continuous improvement in educational quality. And so I would encourage you right this second, if you are someone who has an observation tool and you are using it in your state and you say, hey, my observation tool does this, or even if you don't, please drop them in, because as I just see Miguel said, rubrics are always useful and welcomed, and there may be people on this call who are looking to revise their tools they're using or shift their tools, and you may have something that they can take that would be a benefit to them. And so consider sharing your tool with the group at large. And for those of you who are in that space of making considerations or considering how to change your policy, or I'm sorry, change your tool, some things that I would encourage you to think about are around programmatic indicators. So programmatic indicators are generally grouped into these 4 domains that are, these are learning environment features, their activity engagement, their knowledge and practices, and then youth development. And so these learning environment features are the domain that assesses the physical space and setting. So it ensures that there's learning supports, there's adequate materials, there's good space, that the time is managed well. Then you have this activity engagement, and it evaluates how well the activities engage students, whether they encourage active participation or interest in the topic. It ensures that the activities are done with purpose and they're not just roll out the ball types of activities. And then knowledge and practices. This focuses on how well and how effectively the program fosters this understanding of concepts and the inquiry practices that really deepen learning for our students. And then the last of the 4 domains is youth development. It examines how the program supports positive youth interactions and makes learning relevant to students' lives. And so as you think about the tools that you're using for visits, they should help pinpoint these strengths and areas for improvement while supporting continuous quality enhancement in programs. So we're going to look at an example tool. This example tool is from the Dimensions of Success observation tool, and it was developed by Partnerships in Education and Resilience in partnership with Harvard University. And it's specifically designed for STEM programming. So as I mentioned, I'd encourage you to share your own tool with your states, from your states in the chat, so that other SEAs can have a chance to look at them. But I picked this one to share with you because it allows you to see another type of rubric, to use Miguel's word, of continuum from evidence absent to compelling evidence. And it allows you to look at what that might look like, because it has both the definitions across the top, where there's minimal evidence, there's weak evidence, there's clear evidence, and then there's that consistent and meaningful evidence, and then what it actually looks like in practice, right? From where evidence is absent, that students are mostly passive, whether they observe or a demonstration or they listen to a facilitator talk with little opportunities for hands-on engagement, to compelling evidence, where there's opportunities for students to explore STEM content by engaging in hands-on activities, where students do the cognitive work themselves, and the facilitator maintains the role of the facilitator versus that teller, right? Sometimes we are in spaces and places where the adults do a lot of telling to youth, and other times where you see adult facilitators who are fantabulous questioners, right? Where they ask these great questions to our young people to help them support their learning, support their development. And so I'd encourage you to think about some kind of continuum in your program, clear definitions, and then clear examples of what you would see, hear, and experience in those spaces. And so we're going to think about what we've seen in our program spaces, and we're going to think about activities and their purposefulness, right? I want you to think about an activity you observed in a program that was not purposeful and when that was. And I want you to share a little bit about the activities. You can either unmute, you can share it in the chat box, you can grab your annotation tool and write it on the screen. But we want to hear a little bit from you about an activity that lacked evidence that it was purposeful and other activities that demonstrated evidence that they were purposeful, because we want to think a little bit more about what it means for activities to be purposeful, to have that strong evidence around them. So I added an activity to this list, and I hope some of you will continue to, but I visited a program and they were doing a shoemaking activity where all the students were given newspaper and masking tape and they were supposed to make shoes. And although that shoemaking activity was fun, they were enjoying it, there was no clear direction around where they were going. It's kind of like this other example that's coming up here. There was no objective, there was no direction, right? The students weren't pushed to use those critical thinking skills. They weren't pushed to use design engineering skills or STEM skills, right, to support that learning process. Our CCARs can do amazing things that have compelling evidence for learning, and yet that's not necessarily the case if that's not what's been done. Board games is another great example. I see that a lot in programs, that people play board games and they tell me things that sound like, well, we're using these board games to build positive relationships, and we're using the board games to improve critical thinking skills. Yet at times the compelling evidence is lacking. So I think that those are all great examples of places where evidence can be absent. We've got 3D pens used to follow a paper design. Absolutely. Yeah. So now I want you to think about it a little bit more. And when you think about these purposeless activities or these activities where you don't see the evidence of them learning, what would be compelling evidence for students? What is something that would help youth and staff clearly demonstrate their learning? And so for my shoemaking activity, there could be a testing process, right, that we could have that there could be this testing process that we could design. Oops, thank you. Right, this testing process where they could design, they could model them, and then improve the quality of their practice. We've got another example here where we had a lesson on acids and bases and students paired to do a hands-on activity. There's a clear use of a lesson plan, right? When we see students improving the quality of their work through the process, there's some compelling observational evidence, and there's also opportunity for deeper evidence in those places and spaces. And so those are some things that stand out to me as we listen. But Brittany, I want to pass it over to you and let you jump in and see what else you see there.
I can't help but think about project-based learning. And, they're in a very well-planned, well-thought-out project-based learning activity. There can be a plethora of compelling evidence of student learning, but sometimes it can be difficult to wrap our brains around making project-based learning actually project-based learning. And we might gravitate towards, in our programs, towards things that are easier or cheaper and doing worksheets and calling it project-based learning. And it's not necessarily in those cases providing us with the evidence that we need, right? And it's also, it's not what OST is about. We need to try to do things differently to keep students engaged and approach learning from a different angle. And so just thinking about what actually makes project-based learning, those hands-on activities, those scaffolded lessons where they're working towards something that and doing that through a hands-on process and testing and designing, just like you said, doing all those components is where we start to see the evidence that is going to be the muscle behind what we say we're accomplishing, right? And that's the biggest part for me, is that being able to show within the evidence that it is working. That's so important, and it keeps our programs going when we're able to demonstrate that.
With that, and I think those are the things that when we're purposeful in our observations, that's the things that we can help our site corners, our project directors, all of those that we lead see. And that's what matters. And that's really what we're talking about and why we're talking about this.
So thank you for chiming in on all those things. But let's dive in a little deeper into what exactly determines the quality of our data. We know that data can be a difficult thing to keep track of and maintain. We might know it is important, but we might not have the capacity to keep track of it. But there's also things that are going to impact the quality of our data, such as human error, right? This is just errors around data entry, processing, interpretation, and it ultimately leads to inaccuracies, inconsistencies, and we're human. Human error is to be expected, but we can combat that by making sure that we're diligent and following the protocols and using the platforms for data entry the way that they're meant to be used. There's also, from region to region, state to state, everybody might be operating in different databases or software platforms. And the programs themselves might not be familiar or not have adequate training around those platforms, which can result in fragmented or incomplete data. And that just makes it challenging to maintain the consistency that we need. And it's not reliable. We also know that, standardization across the board is something that can really impact the data that we collect, right? If there's a lack of standardized data, if we're not looking to collect the same things in the same way, the quality can suffer, right? When we use those different systems and varying formats, it's just another way that it's adding to the inconsistency and the challenges that we experience. There's also, insufficient validation process where, if we're not being rigorous in how we validate our data, it can make it erroneous. And that just leads to, again, more inaccuracies and unreliable data sets. And then there's data that's outdated or obsolete or not relevant, right? It has not been maintained or updated. I mentioned earlier, like they haven't looked at the data for 6 months. That's too long ago, right? We have to be regular in our data collection because otherwise it becomes irrelevant or incorrect, and it really reduces the overall usefulness and accuracy that we need to be able to make sure that we're reflecting the work appropriately, right? That we're proving that we're doing what we're saying we're doing. And all of this leads to just costly things on your program, both in like the financial capacity, but also in the overall quality of your program, right? So it leads to flawed insights, which can be really derived from those inaccurate or incomplete data sets, and ultimately leads to misguided decision making, impacting overall strategic direction and operational efficiency. We also can see that the financial expenses arise from the need to correct data, right? It's extra time, but it's also extra money to go back and fix all those things that need to be corrected, and implementing those additional data quality measures and compensate for the lost opportunity. And then there's efficiency issues, right? The organizational efficiency is another consequence, as poor data really can impact the overall workflow of a day. It can make things delayed. It requires us to do things again, and it just reduces productivity and hinders our overall performance. So really, it's all about ensuring that high quality data, and I know that you all know this, that high data quality for 21st CCLC programs is absolutely essential to maximizing the impact of the programs on student outcomes. Again, the data is directly tied to being able to tell the story of your programs and why they matter and how you're being impactful. So what do we need to look for as far as poor data goes? So this looks like missing information. We mentioned with document review, like there's just things that are absent that might be incomplete attendance records or student profiles that we really need to be able to gather demographic data or documentation of program activities and outcomes. That all leads to challenges in tracking the student progress and communication with families and ultimately our stakeholders at large. There's excessive time and effort, right? If programs are spending excessive amount of time manually entering things or compiling or reconciling data because the data management systems are ineffective or they're not trained, that is another thing that can add to our poor data collection. It really is, it diverts staff away from the direct student engagement that's ultimately their job, right? To be working with students. But it leads to burnout, lower staff morale, and just reduced program effectiveness. We can also look for insufficient actionable insights, where data analysis may yield limited or unclear insights due to poor data quality, making it challenging for our program staff to really look for trends or assess the program's effectiveness and make decisions that are informed about program improvements and allocations, right? We need to be able to have that evidence to say, this is why we want to do X, Y, Z. But if we don't have sufficient insight here, then we're not justifying the choices that we're making. And then there's just plain old errors in data, as we mentioned, right? Whether it's inaccuracies in the student records or reporting or outcomes, it just leads to inconsistencies. We can look for where there might be errors within our data sets, and lack of visibility. So this looks like, when there's a struggle to visualize the performance metrics. They might be scattered across multiple systems or maybe stored in different formats. And it really just impedes the overall ability to monitor progress and outcomes effectively. And we know that this leads to delays in finding out what the issues are and addressing whatever challenges there might be. And it's a reflection of program quality and how effective is it being towards impacting those student outcomes and the overall program success. So I'm going to ask you to chime in here really quick with your annotation tool again, and think about, what do you see most frequently whenever you are doing those site visits, when you're looking at the documentation? What are some of the things that you've seen along your way? Is it one of these 5? Is it something else? Use your annotation tool and put a sticker on the box that reflects what you see, or pop something in the chat about what you've seen. I see missing information. Yep. I mean, that is a big one. Absolutely. Excessive time and effort. Data collection is daunting. And we just don't necessarily always have the time or the energy, and it just leads to, whenever we have these problems, spending even more time on it. Insufficient actionable insights. Yep, absolutely. These are all things I'm sure you've seen at one point or another, maybe bigger problems or smaller problems, but I'm sure you've seen all of this at some point in time. And data, like I said, it can be so important and yet so daunting. But we have wonderful people in our fold that will be able to help guide us to better understand our data and how it ultimately impacts our programs. So I know you've seen her around on some of our NTAC sessions. She's presented with us. She is a TA liaison. It's Yana. But did you know that Yana here also is like a guru of data and statistics? She has a MA in Curriculum and Education Technology and MS in Statistics and Data Science. And whenever she's not on here presenting webinars with Hillary and I, she's deep in the data and she loves it. So we are excited to welcome Yana today to share a little bit about that side of things, and just echo how important it is and how we can support our programs. Welcome, Yana.
Hey, Brittany, great to be here.
So let's start off with the most common sources of errors that you've seen in student records and program reporting and how we can address those.
So the thing that I see the most with programs, and this is often even more challenging for programs that are operated out of CBOs rather than attached to school districts, is that they end up with a lot of missing data because they don't have program partnerships set up with the school districts with easy access to the data that they need for reporting purposes. So it comes to the end of the school year, end of the summer, the reporting period, and they're not able to easily access either student testing data, student report cards, because they don't have someone to go to and they don't have that system in place. So that's what I see a lot when programs are missing blocks of data. It's often relating to having some problems with that partnership between the school day and the out of school time program. There's also often an issue, especially with programs that have rolling admission of, depending on when students come into the program time, their families may or may not fill in the initial paperwork. So you often do also have students who have some initial missing paperwork, especially if they enrolled in the beginning of the year. Not in the beginning of the year, but in the middle of the year, especially if they are coming from a different school district. So they don't have their grades from the previous year, or they don't have their test scores from the previous year because they came from a different district, and it's then even harder to get access to that data.
Thank you, Yana. And I feel that to my core, having formerly worked in a community organization that ran a 21st C program. It is challenging. Absolutely. So are there any best practices or tools that you can then recommend for training subgrantees to reduce these data entry errors?
I think the biggest thing that is important, and again, this is important for all programs, but especially for those programs that are in CBOs, is that they need to have an established data partnership. And it's not just they have a general data agreement with the school district, but they have a point person in the school district who they talk to every 6 weeks, every semester, every reporting period, and they know that that is the one person. Because if you are getting data from a bunch of different sources, that's where a lot of those errors happen. That's where a lot of the missing data comes in if they don't have one central source for data. So I think the most important thing that state leaders can really reinforce for their subgrantees is that they need to not just have kind of a general sense of, well, we're partnering with our local school district, but there needs to be a name and an email address of somebody who is specifically going to be available to provide them with all the data they need for reporting purposes. So that's the biggest thing. I will also say that working with one program in particular, I think it's also important not to leave the data collection till the very end. Unfortunately, a lot of people have math anxiety, and so some programs, staff, or leaders might kind of leave the data collection or the looking at spreadsheets till the end of the year, and suddenly they have a mountain of work, and it can feel really insurmountable. And that's how many subgrantees submit incomplete data or don't submit their data in a timely manner at all. So the other thing that you can encourage and really put into place in programs is that they have a sort of a data verification schedule of they have to have everything compiled every quarter, every semester. So when it comes to the time where they have to provide their data to the local evaluator, to the state Department of Education, it's not like they have to figure out all their data stuff from the whole entire year. They've been engaging in that process throughout the year.
Those are some great recommendations. And I might even add, like, put it on the calendar, set that time aside. Great. So let me ask about rigorous data validation. You mentioned a little bit about that. What are some rigorous data validation processes that can be implemented to ensure accuracy and reliability?
So this has to do with several pieces. So first of all, one of the things that happens where data errors often occur is when you're moving data from one spreadsheet to another spreadsheet or trying to combine different forms of data. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that the staff have a specific partner, a specific person that they work with, a point person, so that they're able to get all the data or as much data at least as possible from one place. Because the fewer spreadsheets they're working with, the less complex the data, the less likely there are going to be just mistakes that add up. Then other things that they want to think about and work on is making sure that they have a lot of consistency. So are the titles of different columns staying the same across spreadsheets? Are they collecting the same identifying information? So does every spreadsheet have a student ID so that you can always go back and compare and what's known as cross-validation? So a lot of those are kind of best practices on data structuring, and that is often something that is going to happen in conversation with their local evaluator. But the local evaluator doesn't generally have access to the school level data. It all has to come from the sites themselves. And so for them, I think the biggest recommendation is minimizing the number of separate spreadsheets you have. And that means having one person that is your contact point, having that specific calendar, as you mentioned as well, and trying to streamline that process. I think honestly, one of the best things that you can do if a program site can do is to have a checklist of all the types of data that they need to collect with the list of where they get that information so that they check it off. And all of that goes into a folder that is shared with their local evaluator, so that information doesn't get lost in the shuffle. And so a lot of the sort of the really easy things of naming your spreadsheet so you know what's in there, all of those types of things will really be helpful for that long-term continuity of data.
Thanks, Yana. Those are some really great suggestions. So we have SEAs on the call today, right? And I'm wondering what advice you might have on how SEAs quantify and address the impact of data quality issues on efficiency and productivity.
So this is an interesting question because there's sort of two parts to this. There is the statistical side of thinking about the math and what you can do from the math side. And then there's also just the more practical perspective of trying to understand where issues have occurred, and trying to quantify those areas of challenge. So from a statistical perspective, if anyone in your office is a statistician or you're working with a statistician, there's things statisticians can do to model missing data, especially looking at attendance, looking at possibly like scraping the web. I'm not going to get into the complicated math of it all. Suffice to say that it is possible to model some of that missing data. But in terms of reporting, what the Department of Education asks for, we want the actual data, not what we can kind of scrub together based on probability. And so if you're thinking about measuring the volume of missing data, which we know, unfortunately, a lot of subgrantees are going to submit incomplete data, that's going to be a problem that occurs. You want to think about what data is of the highest priority, what data you want to make sure that you can circle back with programs, and also sort of quantifying what is missing. So if you know that your state serves 50 out of school time 21st CCLC grant recipients, and you only have data from 25 of them, that would probably be kind of the worst case scenario. But if you are experiencing that, that is probably an indication that there are data quality issues at the program level. So identifying both the sites that have missing data and focusing on the sites that have missing data that's really important. So what are the state priorities? Is it really important for you to have every student's GPA? Or are you much more interested in seeing, how many hours students were present in program and how many hours programs offered of different activity types? So because you're often going to end up with a lot of missing data, I think one of the most important things to do is figure out what's going to be your priority area, and then within your office, when there are additional staff, having staff whose job it is to then circle back to programs and help them find the data when it is missing is going to be really valuable, and having that support. And I think really what it comes down to is understanding that a lot of people have math phobia, and so a lot of programs aren't unintentionally turning in incomplete data. It's just they get overwhelmed and stressed out and it kind of goes on the back burner. So it's not a result of programs like purposefully obfuscating in general. It's often more the case that they were either unable or unsure and oftentimes didn't have a process. And so for when your state is reporting to the Department of Education, it's going to be also really helpful to know how many programs you had, how many programs submitted full data, how many programs are missing each type of data. So that can be something you monitor over time, because programs obviously are in a multi-year grant cycle. One of the goals that can be set up for each of the programs for the next year is, oh, you missed the GPA data. Make sure that in addition to everything you've already been really successful at, you prioritize submitting that GPA data next year, as an example.
Thank you so much, Yana. We really appreciate you joining us today to talk about this subject matter, and your area of expertise. Sharing that with us has been a pleasure, because I know you haven't necessarily done that, at least in a webinar that I've been on with you. So it's very good to hear that your side of the data.
We are all math people. It's just the case that not everyone always feels that way. And so I think from the leadership perspective, it's just about reinforcing and giving people positive experiences and positive associations with math. So you build that confidence in leaders over time.
That's great. And you know what? It sounds just like some of the stuff we need for our kiddos too. So with that said, I'm going to hand things back over to Hillary, and we're going to jump into some feedback.
Yeah, so we've done these visits, we've looked at the data that we have or don't have, as Yana talked a little bit about. And it's that place and that time where it's time for feedback, because if you're going to monitor for quality, you have to give quality feedback. And so I want you to think about feedback you've received throughout your career. And that may be feedback from subgrantees, from your supervisor, from even program staff that may or may not report to you, but have feelings about you and your role as the state agency. And I want you to use your annotation tool. And as you think about that feedback, I want you to tell us how that feedback affected you. Did the input you received improve your skills? Did it motivate you? Did it challenge you? Did it discourage you or frustrate you? I want you to think about what it is that feedback has done for you. And as you are thinking about your responses, I marked a couple for me as I was thinking about feedback that I've received in different seasons and different times of my career. And I was thinking specifically about feedback that has been both frustrating and yet motivating and challenging for me, right? Feedback that like made me crazy, that I felt like was unsupportive or incomplete or limited in what I needed. And yet, like, because of my nature and how I want to learn and I want to improve and I want to grow, that it also motivated and challenged me to find new things and to do new things and to try new things and approach things differently. I hear from this group, right, that they've got feedback that's done all of these things, and maybe not discouraged. No discouraging feedback. That's pretty impressive. I think it's hard to spend a lot of time in programming and not get some feedback that's discouraging at times. But that said, as you think about your feedback and you think about the feedback that you received, did that feedback cause you to engage or disengage? Right? I think about the feedback that frustrated me, and for me, I chose to engage with it. But sometimes, and some of our subgrantees, our staff, are people who are in this work with us may choose to disengage in that process. And, there's lots of reasons why that happens, but we want to talk a little bit about how you can make sure that the feedback that you give, because essentially monitoring is to give feedback, creates this positive impact for subgrantees that allows them to continue to engage in this process. And so when you think about giving feedback for quality improvement purposes, we want you to think about a few things. One, specificity, right? Your feedback needs to be specific rather than general. We talked about that continuum, but it focuses on particular behaviors, actions, or outcomes. Specific feedback helps the recipient understand exactly what they did well or what they need to improve. So a lot of times, specific feedback, I've created a tongue twister by saying specific and specificity over and over and over again. Specific feedback sounds like, I saw this thing occur, right? It speaks to exactly what it is that happened in our program and program spaces. Timeliness. Providing feedback in a timely manner allows the recipient to connect the feedback with the relevant actions and behaviors. And so timely feedback is more likely to be acted upon. You may want to consider making time for feedback that's face-to-face at the end of your visit, like a day of debrief, followed by a report ASAP. Because if by the time your report makes it to your subgrantee or to the site coordinator or to whoever it is, do they still remember what they did in programming on that day? If they don't remember anymore, it's very hard for that feedback to be effective for change. The next one is your feedback should be constructive, right? It needs to highlight areas for improvement in a way that's respectful and encouraging. And so your feedback should focus on behaviors or performance and not on the individual, right? It's the when this happens statements. And it's easy to feel frustrated with people, and it's harder to feel frustrated with situations or scenarios that we're in. And so sometimes when we're not cautious in the feedback that we give, it's quick to use that you language instead of to talk about what's actually occurring. I think it's also important to be sensitive to individual differences, creating that safe space for individuals where they feel comfortable expressing their ideas and responding to that feedback, and paying attention to things like their body language, to other nonverbal cues, so that you can tailor your feedback in a way that shows and demonstrates care and compassion for the work and effort that they do put in, and yet speaks to the things that you need to see. It's important that we're clear. We, as we give feedback, need to be cautious to avoid our jargon that we use in our Department of Education offices, or whatever you call your educational offices, right? We need to be cautious about language that's ambiguous, right? We need to be very clear. In 21st CCLC programs, we do this. That's important because every program, every context may not use the same language. We often notice and know that our LEAs use very different lingo and language and jargon than some of our CBOs do. And if they're not embedded into the 21st CCLC world, if they're new to it, that jargon can make our feedback less effective or ineffective. Relevance may seem obvious, but providing feedback that's relevant is more likely to be valued and acted upon. And so that means making sure that our feedback is connected to the recipient's goals and responsibilities and context, right? It's easy for me to say, oh, well, in my state where I live, we do this. And yet, if that feedback doesn't apply to you because you live in a place that's much different than the place that I live, that makes it hard to consider and think about. And so I'd encourage you to take that own perspective and apply it to the feedback that you give to your subgrantees. And is what you're talking about and how you're talking about it relevant to the context in which they work? Balanced. We need to remember that our feedback needs to acknowledge both strengths and areas for improvement, right? We often talk about feedback sandwiches at the NTAC and providing those positive things that bookend the this is where we need to improve. And in order for feedback to be well received, we need to talk about that. And we want to encourage self-reflection, right? When we encourage the participants in the feedback process, that is the ones who we are giving the feedback to think about their own practice, it allows and strengthens the impact and the change that's most likely to happen in feedback. And so if you're interested in learning a little bit more about this, we are doing a session on July 16th. Thank you, Brittany, for dropping it in the chat, called Unlocking Reflection, Tools and Techniques for Unreflective Adults. We'd encourage you to join us. We will talk about some strategies that you can use to support reflection in the staff that you're engaging with, in the program directors, in the site coordinators, in the frontline staff, whoever it is that you're interacting with and trying to support the reflection. That said, as you think about feedback and improving your feedback, many of us, particularly if you're new in your role, may find giving feedback that's maybe received as negative by a subgrantee something that's difficult. And so I encourage you to think about this model that we're going to share in a moment as a strategy that you can use to give feedback. And I will also encourage you that the more feedback you give and the more consistently you give it, it will become more natural. Because it's hard to go to a program and say, here's the thing that you need to do to improve. And yet, when you do it well, it makes big changes for programs. And over time, you will see that change make a difference in your state. And over time, those small changes, if we do it collectively in 21st century programs across the nation, we will begin to see change for youth who need it, who are engaged in our programs, and change in our nation. And I think that's why many of us do this work. That's that. I got a little off track there. Stood on my soapbox, Brittany. Anyway, so start by acknowledging the common mission and values, right? Make the observation that you're both working to the same goal. You as a representative of the state agency and the subgrantees are both working to improve opportunity for youth, wanting them to learn and grow. And I would encourage you to say that. You may need to be more specific then. We're both wanting to learn and grow, but acknowledge those common mission and values, and then address the area for growth. As you address that area for growth, I would encourage you to be factual in what you saw in the policy, the procedure, in the records. Provide that objective information and remind them of how it affects the program, right? Share the impact of whatever that behavior is on the program. This can mean their site, their program, the state level impact of, when you don't implement STEM programming that you've said in your grant proposal you do, how that impacts the students, the families, the staff, whoever it is. And then discuss a plan to support and improve, right? It's here that we take time to identify how you can support the program, how you can take steps to improve the performance of the program. It's here that there's this conversation that happens. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment. But then don't forget to identify those strengths, right? Wrap that conversation up, saying, here's a strength that we see, right? It's the reason that we do observation. It's the reason that your presence in the program is important, to be able to say, like, here's the thing that you're doing well, because we want those people running programs not to walk away from our visits defensive or protective, but to say, like, this is feedback that I can do something with that will motivate them to make changes that improve program outcomes. And so I'd encourage you to kind of use this cycle as you give feedback to your programs, right? In those visits, to acknowledge that common mission and values. You give that objective information, talk about how it affects the program, and then plan to support and improve, ending with talking about strengths. So we are going to listen to a conversation that's reflective of real things that you may see at programs. So we've got some volunteer speakers for us. And so our first person in our little role play is Andrew. He is going to play the role of someone who's providing training and technical assistance, whether it's someone from the SEA or someone who's supporting that work for the SEA. We mentioned subcontractors, as it may be, who's going and doing one of those. Then we have Yana. She's going to play the role of a project director and is going to be engaging in that conversation. And then the last person in our little role play is Chaz. Chaz is playing the role of a site coordinator who works under Yana. They're all connected to the same program. And so I want you to listen to this conversation, and I want you to think about what you would be seeing, what you would be hearing as you engaged in this visit that would be bringing attention to quality. Okay, so I'm going to pass it off to Andrew. He's first, but here we go.
I am doing quality improvement visits at one program in the rural northwest part of the state today. I visited 2 sites during after-school programming. Yesterday, I read through their operations report for the 2023-2024 school year. This program is STEAM-focused and also offers health and wellness activities, homework support and activity, and snack daily. I also sent over the operations report to the program director and asked if there had been any updates since it was submitted to me. She replied quickly that nothing had changed. I arrived early to the first site to meet the program director and complete a document review and interview. All of the documentation seemed to be in order. Daily attendance logs for the previous month showed an ADA of 52 for this site, and activity plans provided objectives, materials needed, the link to step-by-step instructions, as well as tools to assess student learning for each activity. I went quickly through the rest of the documentation. I wasn't concerned with compliance, but was focused on quality improvement. And noticed that there is a training log that indicates that there is staff training offered every month. It included a list of topics covered. With all that in mind, I began my interview with the program director. Take a listen. I'm excited to learn more about your program and to see how things are going. Let's start with a broad question. What are you excited about that occurred this year, and what challenges did you face?
You're on mute, Yana.
My bad, I thought I had muted. Sorry. This year has been quite eventful. I'm thrilled about the success of our STEAM activities. The students are really engaged, and we've had some fantastic projects completed. Our health and wellness activities, along with daily homework support and snacks, have also been well received by the students. We're averaging 52 students daily, which is fantastic. However, family engagement has been a significant challenge. Despite our efforts, we're having a hard time getting parents involved in the program.
Mm, that sounds like a lot of great work. Family engagement can be indeed very tricky. Tell me about what specific steps you have taken to try and improve it.
We've tried a few different things like hosting family nights and sending home newsletters, but attendance at these events has been lower than we hoped. We're considering offering virtual sessions to see if that makes it easier for parents to attend.
You know, it's great that you're exploring different approaches. Let's talk about safety concerns. What safety concerns did you deal with this year, and how did you address them?
We've been fortunate not to have any major safety incidents. We have clear protocols in place, and staff are well trained to handle emergencies. We did conduct a few drills, and they went really smoothly. The only minor issue was ensuring all students understand and follow safety rules consistently.
Bravo, that's very good to hear. Speaking of rules, though, what happens if a student breaks the norms or rules? How do staff address this?
We follow a restorative practices approach. If a student breaks a rule, we address the behavior immediately with a conversation to understand the root causes. We then work with the student to come up with a way to make amends. Repeat issues are handled with more structured interventions, and we involve parents when necessary.
Based on your response, it sounds as if you have a very solid system in place to treat with those issues. So let's now talk about student progress. What progress did you make towards your goals this year, and what other impacts did the program make?
We've seen some individual successes with students completing impressive STEAM projects and improvements in health and wellness habits.
That's so important, yeah, because understanding student progress is crucial to a successful 21st century program. Tell me, how do you currently track and measure student progress and need?
We keep records of attendance and participation in activities. I have lots of pictures of the work that students have done.
Okay, that sounds good. Moving forward, what steps have you taken to implement recommendations from our previous visit?
Well, we've actually increased our staff training sessions to monthly, focusing on program quality and effective student engagement techniques. We've also worked on improving our documentation and record keeping processes.
That's a positive step. Tell me, how do you support staff to ensure quality programming?
We provide monthly training sessions and regular check ins to address any concerns or challenges. We also encourage staff to attend external workshops and conferences to bring new ideas back to the program. And I'm going to be going to the 21st CCLC Summer Symposium this year. We're also getting ready to start a peer mentoring support system for our staff, where more experienced staff support newer team members.
It sounds as if you're doing a lot of support to your staff, and you're also taking some key steps to enhance the program. What specific progress did you make toward your goals this year?
So we've been successful in increasing student participation in STEAM and wellness activities. We've also provided significant homework support.
I really hope you've taken some time to celebrate those successes, because you have done a lot this year, but also spend some time identifying areas for growth. And so finally, I'd like you to share with me, what are your plans for next year to address the challenges and to also build on this year's successes?
So for next year, we plan to implement a more robust system for tracking student progress. We want to increase our efforts to engage families, and we hope to continue to provide strong support and training for our staff. We're also looking into some new partnerships that can offer additional resources and opportunities to our students.
Thank you so much for sharing all this information with me, and I wish you all the best for programming.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the support and guidance you've offered.
This sounds great, right? Well, I think so. You'd agree with me. So I was looking forward to visiting the program, and so I headed downstairs to see what the students were doing. I was eager to see the students engaged in the STEAM activities, but also to see the health and wellness programs the program director had spoken about. Upon entering the room, I noticed the students were scattered around the room. Some were building Lego structures, others were playing Jenga, and a few students were coloring. The activities lacked the structured, purposeful engagement I expected from a STEAM-focused program. There were 26 students present and 3 staff members, one of whom was a site coordinator. The staff members seemed preoccupied with managing behaviors and maintaining order. One staff member was repeatedly asking a group of students to quiet down, while another intervened in a minor dispute over Jenga pieces. The lack of engagement from the staff was particularly troubling. They were present, but their roles seemed limited to crowd control rather than fostering a supportive and enriching learning environment. After a short while, I headed to the other program where I was scheduled to interview the site coordinator and to observe. So when I arrived at the next site, the students were putting away their homework and book bags, and they were generally cleaning up the program space. The site coordinator announced that it was time for health and wellness. Students lined up and went outside, some grabbing balls from a bin. And once they were outside, the students dispersed. Several of them went to play basketball. I noticed a group of girls went to sit on a bench. Several more of the students went to play soccer. The program staff stood together and chatted a little about who still had homework. Then the site coordinator came over for his interview. Take a look at what happened during the interview. Good afternoon. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me today. I just observed the transition to health and wellness, which looked like a recess period on the playground. Could you start by telling me about what you do in the program?
Sure. I'm responsible for overseeing the daily operations of this site. I ensure that all the activities run smoothly, manage the staff, and handle any issues that arise. We focus on STEAM activities, health and wellness, homework support, and of course, providing snacks for the kids. Our students work so hard during the school day that they just sort of need a break. So for health and wellness, we play outside as long as the weather allows.
I see your program offers a plethora of activities for students to participate in. I want you to tell me, with all that has happened this year, what are you excited about and what challenges did you face?
The challenge has been keeping the students engaged, especially with some of the STEAM projects. Sometimes they just want to play. And we've also seen attendance drop steadily throughout the year.
Hmm. What about safety concerns? Did you face any of those this year and how did you address them?
We haven't had any major safety issues, but we're always vigilant. We make sure the playground's safe and that students are supervised at all times. I mean, we did have a few minor incidents like scraped knees, but nothing serious. And we always follow up with the parents and document everything.
That's good. Parents always want to know what's happening to their kids while during programming. So tell me, how do the students get along with each other, but also with the staff in the program?
Generally, they get along well. Of course, there are occasional disagreements, especially during free play, but our staff handle these situations calmly and fairly. So we try to teach the kids conflict resolution skills.
Absolutely. You have a busy bunch of kids here, so that's expected, but you're doing a good job, it seems, taking care of that. I'm curious to know, tell me, what is the purpose of the program from your perspective?
From my perspective, the purpose is to provide a safe place for students after school who have parents at work. It's about giving them a place to complete their homework, support them, and let them socialize with their peers.
Well, I think Andrew may have been disconnected.
I'm
But
pretty sure I heard him ask what progress I made towards the program's goals this year before
yeah,
That's
he left.
correct.
That's what I thought I heard him ask. We kept our students safe after school, and I think we could improve our engagement in STEAM projects. The kids enjoy them, but we don't always have enough time or resources to dive as deeply into them as we'd like.
Hmm. So tell me, uh, what kind of, uh, in fact, first of all, before I ask what kind, have you received coaching, feedback, or any sort of professional development during the year? Tell me about that.
No, there isn't really time for professional development. The program director does respond if I send an email with a question, though.
Hmm. Okay. So with all you've shared with me this afternoon, if you could change one thing about the program, what would that be?
I'd love to have more structured training and STEAM activities for our staff. While we have good intentions, I feel like we lack the depth and expertise to make the most out of these activities. So more resources and training in this area would really help.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. Thank you so much for sharing all this information with me. It really gives me a good sense of where the program stands, but also what might be areas for improvement that you could work on as well. All the best.
Yes, best.
well, thank you, Yana, Andrew, Chaz, for jumping into that. I do want to take just one moment and say to you all, as you think about that, we saw some information gathering, right? There was pre-visit self-reporting, there was a staff interview and leadership interview, and activity observations. But I want you to think about, as you listen to that, and as you take into context the things you heard today, which of the activity considerations and data concerns do you have? Like, what are you concerned about? Because as I listen to that, and just things that jump out to me is that I see some missing knowledge and practices around youth development. I see a site coordinator who doesn't quite understand what we're going for around the program. I see a lack of insufficient insights around that are actionable for the program staff. And I do see some inconsistency between data, between what's reported and my observations and interviews. And so I would want to talk to the program director a little bit about that. I'd love to give some feedback around that. That said, as you think about your plan to support and improve, please, I would encourage you to think about using a multi-tiered system of support approach, right? With universal technical assistance, training resources that you provide to all subgrantees, but then considering whether there's a need for targeted support. This could involve on-site visits, virtual coaching, training sessions, or intensive support where you have one or two subgrantees who are struggling to do some of the work that's needed to implement 21st CCLC programming effectively. Now, that may seem like a big ask for you, but we would like to just say this. The 21st CCLC NTAC is designed to be your partner in multi-tier system support. And so we can provide support in all three of these areas. And you can visit our website, 21stcclcntac.org. And if you go to connect with us, you can access a technical assistance request form. Please take some time to fill that form out and ask for support so that you don't have more work than you can actually do. We would love to provide some support in that area. I'm also going to encourage you in these last moments to fill out the form, the feedback form that Brittany dropped in the chat. We want to know if these sessions are helpful to you and how they're helpful to you and what else you would like to hear. We would encourage you to reach out to us with any questions that you have as a result of this session at info@21stcclcntac.org. And we encourage you to stay informed with what's going on by signing up for our newsletter. You can scan the QR codes on your screen or follow us on X or LinkedIn to see what we're up to, what we're talking about. But again, please take a moment and fill out the feedback form. We want to offer technical assistance that's valuable to you. And if this was not it, please tell us. And if this was, please tell us anyway, because as you well know, since we've talked about data today, we are supporting the U.S. Department of Ed through this project, and we would like your feedback because we too have to turn in data and metrics that demonstrate the work that we're doing. So take your time, please do some feedback, and we're happy to hang out, answer a couple questions if you have any, but thank you for joining us for this session today.